Right, so instead of getting out of Syria and bringing about an end to Israeli atrocity in the now post-Assad state, instead of paying the blindest bit of attention to the threats and rhetoric coming from the new HTS-led administration and their strongly worded letter of complaint against Netanyahu and Israel to the UN, still blasting the living daylights out of Syria as Israel is, instead of starting off on a neighbourly and diplomatic stance with an organisation Israel helped aid in order to overthrow Assad, it seems Benjamin Netanyahu, not liking the way he's being spoken to, not liking the attitude of these new Syrian administration upstarts, has committed the biggest bombing of Syria since the fall of the Assad regime on December 8th, setting off an explosion in an inhabited area so large it registered as an earthquake on the Richter scale, and the area is still so immolated the job of assessing casualties has not yet been able to begin. Whilst this particular strike has made mainstream coverage in no small part because of its sensationalism, it is hardly Israel's only strike within Syria in the last 24 hours, as IDF troops have advanced once again from the occupied Golan Heights, striking at 4 different targets all at the same time, all seeking to yet again expand the amount of Syrian territory Israel occupies, all apparently because those same HTS allies they helped into power are now Islamist-led rebels, now that they've exceeded their usefulness. Right, so following complaints to the UN by Abu Muhammad al-Julani, the new power in Syria, leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or HTS, that Israel needed to stop striking Syria now, that they were Israel's allies, that there was no need for violence, Benjamin Netanyahu, suffering from an ego that bruises like a peach, that HTS would have the temerity to moan about him, despite his most immoral army seizing yet more Syrian territory, saying that the occupied Syrian territory of the Golan Heights is going to be Israel's forever, and destroying research and military infrastructure everywhere across Syria and refusing to stop despite Assad having been overthrown. I just can't put my finger on why the new Syrian regime of al-Qaeda leftovers would have issue with Israel. But for as much as Israel, along with Turkey and the US, helped put them in power, CIA assets as they ostensibly are, installed to disrupt weapons transfers and aid from Iran to Lebanon and Hezbollah, HTS have now exceeded their usefulness, it seems. They are in power in Syria, yes, but their former allies and handlers don't seem to be able to give a toss whether they are capable of doing that or not. Removing Assad was all that mattered. Disrupting Iran's axis of resistance was all that mattered. And at the end of the day, the West will rally behind Israel as they always do. Turkey as well, whose interference with their neighbours belies their real only usefulness, which is as an oil pipeline to Netanyahu's genocidal regime. How dare al-Julani demand anything of Netanyahu? He should be grateful he's only bombing military targets, I dare say, is the thinking, because instead of winding things up and going home after taking out one of Israel's enemies in Bashar al-Assad, Netanyahu is back to land grabbing, creating an all-new enemy off the back of it, and nothing quite puts an exclamation mark on that point, quite like setting off an explosion so big it formed a full-on mushroom cloud and registered as a 3 on the Richter scale. But it was no earthquake. The strike overnight was one of the most violent rounds of airstrikes committed by Israel on Syria since the fall of Assad on the 8th of December. The day before, on Sunday, Israel hit Syria 61 times alone, the single biggest day of strikes since Assad was toppled, and creating earthquake-like tremors in and of themselves, and bringing the total number of strikes on Syria post-Assad up to 473. Justify 473 strikes. Well, what am I thinking? Israel never have to justify anything, do they? When the guy they wanted brought down had already been brought down, after all. The big one, though, this mushroom cloud explosion, was itself just one of 18 strikes in the coastal Tartus region of western Syria, an area that has come under heavy attack by both Israel and the forces of HTS, it has to be said, notably centred around the Tartus town of Latakia, where arms stockpiles have been destroyed by Israel and summary executions of the local populace and figures from the Syrian army of Assad have been carried out by HTS. The explosions were caused courtesy of Israeli airstrikes. The size of this one, notably, is assumed at this point to be because of as a result of hitting a particularly large arms cache there. Therefore, the size of the explosion was dramatically larger than expected. Allegedly, the target being warehouses full of surface-to-surface missiles, as well as apparently being the base for Syria's 23rd Air Defence Brigade. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights weighed into this, as explained by this excerpt from the Times of India's coverage. The observatory reported that the strikes devastated the base of the 23rd Air Defence Brigade and nearby facilities used to store advanced weaponry. The heaviest strikes in Syria's coastal region since the start of strikes in 2012, it said. Israel has long conducted airstrikes in Syria to prevent advanced weaponry from reaching hostile groups such as Hezbollah. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that the strikes aim to thwart security threats and maintain stability along Israel's northern border. We have no interest in a conflict with Syria, he said, adding that Israel's actions were aimed to thwart the potential threats from Syria and to prevent the takeover of terrorist elements near our border. Defence Minister Israel Katz echoed Netanyahu's sentiments, describing Syria's evolving situation as a heightened risk to Israel's security, despite the moderate tone of new Syrian leadership. Ahmed al-Shara, the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, and Syria's de facto ruler after President Bashar al-Assad was ousted, criticised the strikes, calling them unprovoked aggression. However, he stressed that Syria was focused on reconstruction and avoiding further military confrontations. Ahmed al-Shara being the birth name of al-Julani, in case that caused any confusion. He is apparently using it again rather than his al-Julani nom de guerre, just for the sake of clarity, but he's less well known by it still, I think. But both Netanyahu and Katz are paranoid fools whose paranoia is going to see them make another enemy. Despite al-Julani's claims to not want war with Israel, no military strikes, no armed action, they're focused on rebuilding Syria. But there will be no diplomatic ties either at this rate. How can there be? An enemy they are being treated as already on a just-in-case kind of a basis. Israel's reliance on the West to protect it makes it feel invincible, but it's a chronic weakness in reality since you're no longer self-sufficient and are seen more and more widely as a global pariah, and therefore it becomes more and more unpopular as far as policy goes to keep that support up for other nations and their leaders. It's also not even the only violation of Syrian sovereign territory they've been up to either. On 4 separate fronts have Israel opened up new fronts in attacking Syria overnight. This is going grossly unreported, all of which have stemmed from occupied territory in the Golan Heights in the name of further territorial expansion. As I've spoken about in a number of videos now, one of the first targets upon invading Syria that Israel made for was Mount Hermon, inside the demilitarized zone between Israeli-occupied Golan and Syria, a violation of the 1974 Separation of Forces Agreement, that 50-year-old ceasefire armistice that Netanyahu declared null and void, as that taking of Mount Hermon was. I've surmised it might give them a downhill route into Lebanon, since the mountain sits on the Syrian-Lebanese border. But equally, it does likewise further into Syria too, and that is exactly what has happened, with the military now having entered Syria from Mount Hermon, pushing 26 kilometres deep into the Damascus countryside at that, potentially moving on Damascus itself even. It is part of the greater Israel ideology that Israel should stretch to Damascus after all, at least according to Israel's hard-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, who is all for that, and would again be another reason Israel would want to distance itself from HTS. Because if further expansion is their plan, they need to make them an enemy to excuse doing that. Further south, at the point Israel first invaded Syria through the city and governorate of Quneitra, the IDF have now pushed a further 24 kilometres into Syria. Further south from there, the IDF also moved into the village of al-Mu'allaka. This is the southern Quneitra governorate countryside, so it's just a little further south, along the border with the more southern Dara governorate. And fourthly, Israeli forces have also moved into the Yarmouk Basin in the very far southwest of Syria, the nice southerly area bordering the occupied Golan Heights, and also bordering the north of Jordan at this point as well. So 4 incursions dotted from the far north of occupied Golan to the far south, all pushing eastwards further into Syria to seize more territory, potentially for further annexation and more Israeli occupation. And all of this is going to further incite the HTS leadership, but Israel are paying them no mind. The UN are sitting on their hands as per usual. HTS are exhausted from fighting and have little in the way of means to fight Israel or defend themselves against Israel. And they've got no friends either, having chosen to side with Israel against Syria and all of their allies. And now they seemingly have nobody. Something has to give somewhere, but for more on where the HTS leadership is versus Netanyahu and his invasions and airstrikes, do check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. And please do also hit like, share and subscribe before you do that though, so you don't miss new daily content going forwards. It is massively appreciated. It all helps to support the channel. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.